legislation and hire more people, which is really exciting for a state like Minnesota in particular, especially. And on the health care front, I just want to mention also that I've introduced legislation that is going to expand the opportunity for those who have health care savings accounts. You know, Minnesotans in particular want to have more choice and lower costs when it comes to health care for themselves and their families. And I've introduced a bill that will increase the flexibility for health care decisions that are made by yourself or families to make it more affordable. And we do that by basically removing barriers to using these health savings and flexible spending accounts. And the best part of these accounts is that it's your money. This is your money to use and keep as you see fit for your health care. You have control over the money that's there. You can choose to use it on current medical expenses. You can save it for the future. And it's really a flexibility that Americans want, and that's why basically 20 million Americans now are using or eligible to be covered under these plans. But the legislation essentially will broaden eligibility by allowing you to contribute to a health care savings account if you are a Medicare Part A enrollee who's 65 or older, because that has been prohibited in the past. But we want to make sure that you're going to still have that option, even as a senior, as well as now allowing active military members to use this provision as well for health care savings accounts. So watch for that, because I think we probably will get some bipartisan support moving forward here at the end of the year, and we're hoping that that may be part of either a separate bill in healthcare or a larger package that deals with some hospital payment reform, for instance. And then finally, let me just mention this issue, and we're going to go to our questions, and dial *3 on your telephone if you'd like to have a chance to ask a question yourself. And then I want to mention an issue regarding, again, the tax legislation. We actually did some good things at the end of last year, giving more certainty to those who make contributions to charity, who do the right thing. You know, a lot of Minnesotans in particular give their time, their energy, and their resources to different charities. But the tax code, unfortunately, sometimes punishes people for that type of giving. And so I authored legislation to make permanent, because it was just basically renewed year after year after year, to make permanent, if you've got an IRA, and it was to allow you to directly roll over any money in an IRA directly to a charity of your choice without having a tax penalty, without having an income tax distribution. And so that's just a really good thing, and we've had really good feedback from folks that are excited about that, to keep that charitable giving going, especially among Minnesota's different charities and civic organizations. And I've also introduced new legislation that will allow interest that is made from your savings account, from your checking account, to be given directly in a direct rollover to a charity of your choice as well. And it's something that's been piloted in Minnesota by some of our banks, but we're trying to expand it and just basically let more Americans be aware of even just giving less than $10 that they may earn on a savings account or a checking account for the year, because you're not getting much interest on these accounts, and just go directly to a charity and make it simple, make it easy, and do that rollover. Now we're going to go into our questions, though. So if you can, dial *3 on your telephone, and we'll have a chance to go directly into the issues. And we've got, I think we got Lori in the line for Edina. Lori, thanks for waiting. Now, let me see if we still got Lori here. Hold on, I think we do. Lori, if you're there, thanks for waiting. Lori, you there?
I'm there.
Hey, thank you for waiting.
Not a problem. It was like about a 30-second wait. So I will just tell you, I am having a very difficult time understanding why Republicans want to repeal Obamacare. It affects, let me tell you, 15 million people out of 300 and some million people. It affects my son, who has a pre-existing heart condition, and a bunch of people. And I don't understand why you want to repeal this, because it's such a, out of 15, it's like 1% of the population of the United States. And why, out of all the industrialized countries, we can't provide health care for everybody?
Oh, got it. Yep. Well, first of all, it's a really good question from this perspective. Couple of things. When you talk about Obamacare, the 15 million people that you're talking about, in particular, are the folks that care, right? Pre-existing conditions such as your son, for instance. And one of the key points there is that if we're able to if we're able to make sure that we're going to be allowing low-cost options for all Americans, then we're going to have to make sure that I think we're not doubling everyone's premiums, we're not raising everyone's deductibles, because that's essentially what's happened. It's not just Republicans. I mean, it's been bipartisan that there are better answers to health care.
But I will also tell you, my son couldn't get health care. So if you double premiums, it doesn't affect him at all because it'd be triple, quadruple premiums. So I'm just saying, so double them. I don't care. I just think that every American in an industrialized, in any industrialized state around the world has health care except for the United States. I mean, it's tragic. It's tragic. We should provide at least minimum of something. But when I look at Obamacare, it only affects 0.4% of Americans in the United States. It's not like it's a huge amount. And the Republicans campaign on all this. Now, I've been a Republican for umpteen trillion years.
Right.
My mother was in the southwestern Minnesota. She was the congressional representative for everybody. I mean, when I was growing up, that's all we heard. And I'm just telling you right now, I am like having had a son with a heart condition and will never get insurance again. And I said to my mother, "Oh, you want to vote for the Republicans because they'll deny your grandson coverage, and you will. And these pre-existing diseases, we have to move beyond that." And
right, absolutely.
Move beyond. But it isn't only my son. I look at these people that have nothing, and so I have moved from being in an extremely. My mother was a chairperson from our whole District 2, Anchor Nelson, the whole thing. She came to every congressional thing. She went to Washington for the induction of the presidential things, and my parents were very involved. And I'm just totally embarrassed now because our son could be denied all this stuff, and I just think it's just tragic that we can't take care of our own when every other industrialized nation has health care.
Well, Mary, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to move on to the next call, but I'm going to agree with you on this point. One of the key things here, just so you know, one of the key things here is just absolutely we can cover pre-existing conditions. We can do it in a much smarter way without doubling everyone's premiums, without hitting everyone else with higher deductibles. And that's really been why
I'm going to tell you,
you're going
to have to raise premiums for people. My husband and mine...
But they don't need to be doubled.
No, they're not doubled. And don't give me everybody got doubled. Don't give me that because everybody...
And I know we've got Brian, I think, on the phone, too. Sorry. We have a little... Brian, are you there waiting for us? So we're going to keep moving on to our next call here there.
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Thanks for waiting.
My pleasure. Do you want to hear my question?
Absolutely.
Okay, I've got kind of a two-question question. They're both about veterans. There was an issue with that should have come up in front of you today about the Gulf War veterans. Did you see it?
No, this was today. No, I didn't see today's issue, but can you sum it up real quick? And I think is your phone ringing?
The Gulf War issue is that what the law is supposed to be for you would cover Gulf War veterans because of the chemicals that they ingested because of the burn tip of the oils that they have lived through, and the side effects of caused many, many conditions, physical conditions. It's like an Agent Orange type thing. So how are you going to vote for something like that?
Okay, and I have not seen that issue. So,
okay, so you can hold off on that. You can hold off on that one and wait till you see it. Let's put it another way then. Has there ever been a time since you started that you ever voted no when it came to a veterans issue?
Well, I can't think of anything in particular. I mean, I'll just tell you right off the bat, for instance, Brian, I mean, I fully support the VA continue to conduct research in the Gulf War veterans. The House has continued to support those efforts. I fully expect that to continue. As you also may be aware, Brian, a year and a half ago, the country was outraged to learn about the way our veterans are being treated by the VA, whose basically sole purpose is to ensure that veterans get the care they need. Since then, we have given them more funding to hire more doctors, greater flexibility, make sure people are on the waiting list. But we have found out, unfortunately, that the numbers of those waiting 30 days or more to get an appointment are only actually going up. And so the bottom line is, we have a problem. There are solutions available. I'm actually co-sponsoring legislation now that will allow the VA to use self-scheduling technology for appointments at the VA. This is just something that will make it easier for veterans to schedule their appointments, allow them to see in real time when an appointment becomes available. And I mean, this is absolutely not a partisan issue. It is how our nation shows respect for those who have served, though, which is really critical. And so I do expect that support is going to continue. But, look, I think only 2 or 3 people have been fired from the VA for some of the reckless management or activities that have taken place, and that's really, the biggest problem is just changing that culture, changing that management, and having accountability to making sure that people can get fired when there is mismanagement. And that's been pretty much unanimous across the board. In fact, the Minnesota delegation in particular has been working hand in glove on a lot of those issues straightforward, for instance. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. We've got Michael on the line. Michael, thanks for waiting if you're there.
Yes, Congressman, thank you for having these. I appreciate your accessibility. And your tone. Thanks. I have 2 quick questions for you, because I know you've got a lot of people lined up. My first question is about the AMT, the alternative minimum tax. I've been fortunate to be hit by it, but I know from my accountant that because of it, I end up paying a higher percentage of my income to tax than people who make more than I do. And that's because the AMT hasn't been adjusted in years and years and years. It doesn't seem to have the same rates that it was originally intended to. And so I was wondering if you had any plans to take care of, to tweak that, to eliminate it, that sort of thing.
Well, a couple of things. As you mentioned, the AMT, or the alternative minimum tax. This is a tax originally that was designed just to capture just a handful of people, essentially, and it has caught up more and more and more people in middle-income tax brackets in particular. And so I fully support getting rid of the AMT completely. We've had discussions in my committee, in the Ways and Means Committee, which handles tax and trade and healthcare issues, about getting rid of the AMT, not only for individuals, but also for businesses that get caught up in the, small and large, actually, that get caught up. And this is not, essentially, it was originally set up to avoid tax cheats, if you will, but it is just, it's basically because the tax codes got so complicated with different provisions and loopholes and expenditures and deductions, et cetera, that a lot of people are getting caught up in it. So I'm absolutely in favor of just streamlining it, getting rid of it. And this actually just goes by the whole need to actually reform the tax code. I'll be honest, I don't think that we're going to see a lot of progress this year in the election year in terms of fixing a broken tax code. I do think the bottom line on the business side is we have antiquated features that have diminished the attractiveness, for the U.S. as the premier economy to be locating a business. And on the individual side, look, I mean, you deserve a tax code that's respecting the effort you make, that respects the work you do, and respects your time. And that complexity is all too real now, when 9 out of 10 Americans are either paying someone to do their taxes or buying the commercial software to fill out the forms. And so part of that is the alternative minimum tax, too. And we have what's called a scoring issue, and this is just a little pet peeve that some of us have, because anytime we have a bill, then the Congressional Budget Office does a score, the nonpartisan budget office, and by the way, the non-Congressional Budget Office, we mentioned with Lori earlier, I mean, it has scoring issues with how Obamacare is done now, for instance. And so it prevents some changes to bills because you have to sort of account for the so-called cost. So we end up spending time with the CBO folks explaining to them, the impact of different tax policy changes, how it actually will bring in more revenue, how it will be actually making it simpler. And so I'm always, I have an open door on this. I'm looking for more ideas, actually, to draw in and essentially making sure we've got a flatter tax code that's a lot simpler. So if you have ideas on that, Michael, please feel free to share them. Mike in my office is my tax guy, and you can reach out directly to him as well. And we're just looking to bring all that up. We are going to ask a poll question. Again, if you want to ask a question, I dial *3 on your telephone. But I do want to ask you a quick question. And here's the question for you to answer, because I want to make sure we get as many people as possible to respond before we dump off calls. People drop off after a little later. But here's the question. You can just push a button on your telephone. I mentioned earlier some of the legislation we're going to be taking up this week. So here's the question for you. Should atrocities that are perpetrated by the Islamic State against ethnic and religious minorities, such as Christians, Yazidis, in Syria and Iraq, should that be considered genocide? If you think the answer is yes, that should be considered genocide or is a war crime, press 1 on your telephone. If you do not believe that should be the case, press 2. And if you're unsure, press 3. So the question is, again, should the atrocities that are being perpetrated by the Islamic State against ethnic and religious minorities, the Yazidis and Christians in Iraq and Syria, should that be considered genocide? Should that be considered a war crime? Should the people that are perpetrating those crimes be held accountable and tried under war crimes is basically the direction that we're going here. Similar to when, like, Saddam Hussein would be tried for war crime for going after his own people, or Salam Milosevic, in Serbia, Croatia area, when that unrest was going on. If you think the answer is yes, that should be a war crime, press 1 on your phone. If you don't think it should be, press 2. And if you're unsure, press 3. Again, you have to have more information. Sometimes you can't just answer in a simple yes and no respect. But it does give you a good snapshot of just how people are thinking or what their concerns are. And this is an issue that has come up more and more in some of the recent discussions, for instance, that have taken place, both even at the presidential election as well as just on some foreign policy issues. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. I think we've got John in Plymouth who's next on the line. John, thanks for waiting.
Hi, Congressman. Hey, I wanted to first thank you for holding these calls. It's just wonderful to be able to visit with you like this, and your staff does a great job whenever I call them too, so thank you, sir, for that.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to ask my broad question, but with your permission, can I also ask a question specific to my business, and I'll give you both questions at once? May I do that?
Sure, do them all at once and run through them.
My broad question is, could you please comment on the federal deficit, because it's not coming up much in the election cycle here, and
yeah.
I'm a professional investor, and I just see great danger in that, and I'd love to hear your views on it as you look ahead. And then I want to not hog up airtime, so I'll get quick on this. I do use the Freedom of Information Act heavily with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the agency, like a lot of other agencies, is making up excuses. I've done this for 15 years, to block our access to records, so we can't even get a report that they write after an investigation's closed. Like, you can't find out why they investigated someone and what they learned. And I wanted to, if you could please comment on your view on open records, and how can they told me candidly, they said, we know we're breaking the law, sue us. And I've had to sue them in the past, and it's really expensive, and I'm just trying to bring transparency to markets and trying to protect investors. And anyway, those are my two questions. And again, thank you for this kind of time you give us.
Yeah, John, well actually, let me do this. I'll answer the first question first, because you mentioned the deficit. And it's actually just not the deficit, but it's actually the combination of all the deficits that have led to our national debt, right, which I do think is a huge concern. And I would actually argue it's probably the biggest #1 challenge facing our country that is preventing better job growth, that is preventing better opportunity. When I think of my 4 girls or our kids and our grandchildren, it's interesting that only 27% of the population now thinks that their children or their grandchildren will have a shot at the American dream. And I think the biggest issue hanging in front of that, obstacle to that, is that $19 trillion national debt. And so the deficits have come down a little bit recently, but they're going back up. They're expected to go over $1 trillion once again in just a few years, and when interest rates go up, and they will go up at some point, then all the debt payments that have to be a part of paying back this debt is also going to go up. It's going to gobble up everything else in the budget. So I personally believe we should be, the government should be spending its money as wisely as you do. And we've got to continue to get Washington spending under control. We've made some progress, but a lot more has to be done. We've got the domestic discretionary side under control, if you will. It's actually lower now than it was in 2008. But the reality is that it's the mandatory spending programs such as the new health care law, Obamacare, Medicare, and others that are the real cost drivers to debt. And that is we have to have some reforms in that area, or those programs themselves will go bankrupt. And those are important safety nets for a lot of seniors, for a lot of people that are going to rely on those programs. And it's not right, it's not fair to not address those programs, to not fix those programs, and do so in a bipartisan manner, just as Ronald Reagan was able to do with a Democratic Congress years back and extending Social Security. We should be doing the exact same thing right now. And I hope that after the presidential election, winds down in 6 months, we'll see a lot more serious conversation about that. Regarding the Freedom of Information Act, this is not an issue I'm as familiar with the SEC, but I will say this. We have issues with a lot of these agencies offering new regulations, making excuses, and the IRS in particular was holding back and not allowing transparency or accountability for a lot of the terrible and negative actions they were taking against individuals based on their personal beliefs, right? This was supposed to be a nonpartisan agency, and they were targeting people based on their personal beliefs, which is outrageous. The SEC should be no different. And so perhaps my office might be able to help directly. Sometimes when I can write a letter, we can make an inquiry with the congressional liaison within the SEC, and then draw attention to the matter. So if you wouldn't mind, we can follow up with you and just make sure that we have the opportunity to, directly see if we can help. We might be able to do something directly and assist maybe with a letter or just bringing some more, cut through the red tape, I guess, is the bottom line. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. I think next on the line we have is Brian from Edina. Brian, if you're still on the line, thanks for waiting.
I am still on the line. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you great.
Okay. My question was around what Lori was asking.
Yeah.
2009, I was unemployed, and I could get health care coverage for my family of 4 for about $500 a month.
Yeah, was that through Cobra?
It was through a broker. It was an independent broker. I could get $500 a month with a $2,000 deductible. That was affordable. Today I'm self-employed, small business owner, right? That same insurance is now a $5,000 deductible, and it's $1,200 a month.
Yeah.
I can't afford another house payment. I can't afford $15,000 a year in premium for 2 kids that are perfectly healthy. We haven't used the health care system. They don't have a disease. They're perfectly healthy. So I'd like to say, how are you going to fix that? How are we going to fix that? Because that's the fault of the Obama administration. And Lori was saying, well, it's great for her kid who has a pre-existing condition and double the premiums. Well, she's advocating then to rob my children of health care because I can't afford it.
Right.
That short-term insurance right now for 3 months until I get a subsidized or a public assistance. Now, that's for small business owners have to go on a subsidized or a public assistance. There's something wrong here. That's got to change.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, and Brian, this goes back to the exact point, not only from the cost perspective, because you talk about going to a $5,000 deductible from a $2,000 and then $1,200 a month, right? You've more than doubled your monthly premiums. It's almost like you don't even have insurance at that point, right? I mean, because you're paying so much in and your deductible is so high. And this goes back against the whole premise of if you like your doctor, you can keep it. If you like your health care plan, you can keep it. And all of that was true, or false, right? It was proven to be false and proven not to be true. And that's where a lot of us just have issues with the new health care law. The reality is I think we've got to do other things, such as address real quality of care measures, and we should be reimbursing physicians based on quality of care, not on the quantity and number of procedures that they do. We have to have essentially more medical liability reform. We should allow competition across state lines so anybody can buy health insurance anywhere in the country, and you will absolutely see competition in the marketplace. We saw the exact same thing happen with the whole Medicare Part D drug program, and that's come in like 40% under budget, and that's the government set that up. And 40% under budget because all the drug companies were competing against each other and bidding lower and lower and lower, and it's been a really good success. There's other issues with drug prices, but on the drug program Part D, it's been really successful coming in way under budget. We should be looking at those exact type small business owners like yourself can pool together with your own exchanges. You don't have to go into a government exchange. We've seen all the problems with the MNsure exchange, for instance, and the audits that have been done with so many people that are going through that MNsure program that are supposed to be ineligible by law. They are ineligible, and yet they are taking advantage of taxpayer money and getting a benefit that they're not even supposed to have by law. And so, again, I think you raised some really good issues. And I hear from so many small business people and individuals that still say healthcare is an issue because of the cost, and it was not addressed in the new healthcare law. And you can cover pre-existing conditions, absolutely, in a much smarter and much more efficient way. And I guess that's the direction that we would go. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. I think we've got, it looks like we have, I think it's done for me, Dinah.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for waiting.
This is my first time participating in one of these, and I'm glad you do them. First off, this wasn't part of my question, but the question that you asked us to respond to?
Sure, right earlier, yep.
Yep. I think that it's a mistake to lump genocide and war crime in the same answer.
Same sentence?
Yeah. I think you need to ask independently.
Oh, okay.
Is that making any sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I just know that
if you're against, if you think it's genocide or war crime, press 1. Well, what if I think it's one but not the other?
Oh, I see. Yep. Well, and again, that's where sometimes a simple yes/no answer doesn't always encapsulate it. But the discussion we're having this week does sort of, essentially say if this genocide should it be considered a war crime, essentially.
Anyway, that said, I'm an independent, so I tend to just look at both sides to find out what I want to do. And I'm wondering if I would think we'd be much better off if we could get back to single topic legislation.
Okay.
It's like when all this stuff gets muddled together, oftentimes not even related to each other, how do you vote on that?
Yeah, right. And large omnibus bills.
Yeah. And just like one example I thought of is, let's say that you wanted to pass a highway bill to repair the interstate, the highways themselves, and lumped in with that, somebody sticks in a billboard bill, a billboard amendment. Well, what does a billboard amendment have to do with repairing the surface of a highway?
Right, right. No, look, I mean, Doc, I'm going to say you're absolutely right. And one thing I will say about that, I will say this, is that, we have a new speaker, right? So Paul Ryan, good Midwestern guy from Wisconsin, Green Bay Packer fan, true, but he's the Speaker of the House now. He is basically moving to restore things to regular order. We have a lot more people that are able to offer their amendments, both Democrats and Republicans. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to pass, but there's a lot more open process. I think that's healthier. It's good for the institution. It allows every member from the district they come from to stand up and offer what they think we should vote on, what they believe in. And it doesn't guarantee again that it's going to pass, but it does move it forward in terms of just debating more single issues, essentially, right? Amendments, et cetera. And part of that is then not having these big omnibus bills. We had a big omnibus budget bill come up at the end of last December come up, for instance, right? And there were a lot of things in there that were really good. There were a couple things in there you didn't like, because, you'd rather have the appropriations go individually in separate bills. And essentially we were restoring that and getting back on track. And you got to have two partners in that. You got to have both the House and the Senate that are willing to do that. The Senate didn't want to do any separate bills this last year, so we ended up doing them all in one, unfortunately. But I would like to see that process. I'd like to see that discussed in the presidential debates, for instance, to bring more attention to it, to the American public, for instance. Okay, we're going to keep rolling. I think we've got Fred in Eden Prairie waiting. Fred, if you're still there.
Yes, I am.
Hey, thanks for waiting.
Yeah, you were just talking about the enormous spending bill in December, and I wondered, you voted for it, and I was wondering, why did you vote for something like that?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that was the large omnibus spending bill.
It gave Barack Obama almost everything he wanted.
Well, a couple of things, and this is one of those things where, again, because the president signed it into law, just as you mentioned, but there were a couple of things in there that the president didn't necessarily like, but he went along. It basically lifted the oil export ban that had been in place since 1975, which is a big issue for American energy, right, and exporting energy around the world, making sure that European allies won't be under the thumb of Russia, for instance, and so that's more jobs in the United States and, less reliance on foreign oil, which is really critical as well. It strengthened the visa waiver program that protects us here in the United States because we found out that there were like 5,000 individuals that had essentially been to Syria or Iraq or those Middle Eastern countries where there is terrorism, and they have a European Western passport, and they're able to get into the United States because we have a visa waiver program with our Western European allies. And so we had no security, and so I just refused to believe that was something that should not be important, that we were going to let the terrorists win on that one. So we cut that off, and which is really, really important. There's some other things in there. For instance, even on the spending side, it actually spends less in domestic discretionary spending, the least amount of money that has been spent by the federal government since 2008. And so we've gone down in terms of our spending in domestic discretionary spending since 2008, and that was a part of that bill. So, there were some things the president got in there, too, because he was able to eliminate parts of the sequester. There were some Republicans that liked that, too, because then they could spend a little bit more on the military, for instance. So it was kind of one of those things where, again, I'd rather deal with those bills, all issues as separate initiatives, separate votes, separate issues. You get more accountability. It's more transparent, right? You can follow what we're voting on and paying attention, especially for the public. And that's one thing I think that the new speaker is doing in particular is really aggressively moving in that direction, which I really appreciate, and I hope people are paying attention to that, which is really key. Okay, it looks like we've got next on the line. We're going to keep rolling here. I think we've got Terry on the line from Minnetonka. Terry, thanks for waiting.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, Congressman Paulsen.
Yeah.
My question is about Part D Medicare.
Okay.
Okay, and the donut hole. The way that's calculated, you use the entire cost of all the medications going into it, and you use only the out-of-pocket coming out of it. Not only that, but like 3 years ago, I spent $160 on 3 months' worth of insulin. Now when I hit the donut hole, I spend $185 on 1 month of insulin.
Okay.
My understanding is that when Part D was set up, it was set up with the understanding that the federal government would not negotiate prices on drugs like the insurance companies do.
Right.
And I don't understand why the federal government would do that. To me, that's the reason that all the drugs have gone up is because they've got a free ride with the federal government.
Right. And this issue, Terry, thanks for the question. This issue has come up actually more often recently based on similar experiences that you've had just with insulin, right, which isn't even a hard, I guess, specialty drug by any means. We've had other, outrageous price increases by this Turing Pharmaceuticals, with an AIDS drug that have been marked up, for instance. And the CEO basically eventually came out and canceled the price increase. But you got, companies have been taking advantage of situations like that, absolutely. But one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, as far as CMS, allowing that negotiation directly with drug companies, the government to directly negotiate, you mentioned, again, this is where the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, they're nonpartisan. They have repeatedly said that granting the government additional authority to negotiate for lower drug prices would have little, if any, effect on prices, they've said. And they went on to have said that any kind of savings is so severely, it would very severely restrict patient choice. You'd have fewer choices. And I guess one good view of this model would probably be looking at the VA, right, where we talked a little bit about earlier, where this has taken place. There's been that type of negotiation. Veterans have fewer drug choices. They have fewer drug choices than people do on Medicare Part D. So they don't often get access to the drugs that they want and the drugs that they need and that other folks can access. And, from my perspective, I think it's really important to have more patient choice, more competition, and not have the government control it. But at the same time, we have to have oversight, just as you mentioned. I mean, in price from, it was $160 you said to $185, but it was like 3 months I think versus 1 month. Clearly there are issues there, and we're basically looking for other options and getting other feedback, because I think that is going to be an issue that continues to go throughout the summer and into the fall, because it's affecting so many people in a real way. And I think your situation actually kind of highlights a good example. But the Congressional Budget Office, again, just highlights the pitfalls of actually moving in that direction with fewer choices for consumers, which is actually a real problem. Okay, we're going to keep rolling on. We've got Jennifer on the line from Minnetonka. Jennifer, thanks for waiting.
Hi, Congressman. I'm wondering if we can count on you to champion the Southwest Light Rail line that would connect Eden Prairie to downtown Minneapolis. There are a lot of us in the southwestern suburbs who are spending more time in traffic than we are with our kids.
Yeah, and so you're referring to the whole Southwest Light Rail funding line or package that's come forward recently or in recent years. So a couple things I'll point out here is that I think it's really important that any transit proposal, score, and you have to present it to the federal government, and it's got to get approval, and it's got to show that it actually moves people at a very cost-efficient manner. Personally, I'm very skeptical that the light rail is the best way to do it. I know that line has trimmed some of their stations, they've trimmed back some of their costs, they're not doing the tunnel, things like that. But just so you know, the federal government's already approved funding from the Transit Administration. I mean, so this is sort of a non-issue at the federal level. It's really up to the state to decide: are they going to bond for it? Are they going to provide the funding? Are the property taxpayers willing to pay operating costs, etc., going forward? And again, I personally have some skepticism about the wiseness of having that direct line versus more mobile operating systems, high-speed bus, railway, high-speed busways, and things like that that can move people really efficiently. Southwest Transit Association, in particular, does really, really well at that. I used to ride that all the time when I worked at Target downtown and was on that line every single day. But again, this is really going to be a state issue. The state issue at this point. It's not so much a federal issue. All right, we got Al from Eden Prairie, and if you want to ask a question, dial *3 on your telephone. Don't be shy, and we're going to go right to Al. Thanks for waiting.
Good evening, Congressman. I have a couple real quick questions for you. I thought while I was online. First of all, is there any talk of upping especially for people over 50 like myself, upping the contribution limit for the Roth IRAs? I know it happened 20 years ago now. I love the Roth IRA. It is a great thing, but especially if you're trying to catch up for some pretty bad years over the last 15 years, it'd be nice if you have the wherewithal, which sometimes I do. I can toss a few extra bucks in there, and bumping against those limits. And the second thing is kind of getting back to your last comment was, it's really kind of depressing to see the state of our highway system, transportation system as it is right now, and I really don't see anyone stepping up to the plate and saying, we're in a mell of a hess, as my dad used to say, and there's going to be, and sadly, there's going to need to be a huge, look at Flint, billions of dollars for a small city's water system. There's huge amounts of money, and I don't see the population decreasing, and we got the road system that was built for, 50 years ago for traffic for 40 years ago and hasn't been upgraded for traffic for 30 years ago, much less today. 494 just got upgraded. Yay, to 3 lanes. Big deal. It should be 5 lanes. 169 should be 4 lanes. 100 should be 4 lanes. We are so far behind the 8 ball, and, nobody wants to pay for anything. So it's just kind of, a battle of attrition. And I guess, when I think of family values, my thought is the most precious thing you can give for your family is time. And if you're in traffic,
No, right. Actually, good point. Well, first of all, thank you, Al. The first question you had regarding the Roth, and I am not aware of any current proposals that would lift the contribution cap on Roth IRAs. However, it is important to make it obviously as easy as possible to make contributions for their retirement, especially when government safety net programs are being strained more and more. These are tools that have become a vital resource for millions of Americans to build a very their nest eggs, save for the future, etc. But I'm not aware of any current Roth proposal changes, and I'll look into it a little bit more, actually. I know that they have some of those catch-up provisions, but they're only at certain years of your life, etc. And anything that we did, again, this is a challenge we have, is it would have a so-called cost, right, to it when we pass something, we would add to the deficit or whatever. But it is about making sure that people are, and you've got the foresight to do it, right? You're looking at, saving money for your retirement, which is smart, and a lot of folks aren't doing that, unfortunately. On the highway system issue, and those are really good comments, actually. I'll just add this, is that the good news is that for the first time, late last year, we passed a long-term highway bill, and that had eluded Congress for basically a decade, where we just did the 1-year bill, 2-year bill, and we finally passed a 5-year plus bill, essentially, that guarantees funding for a longer period of time. It helps the contractors that are putting in the roads and the bridges, and hiring people and planning for the future with more certainty and predictability. And that's why there's been a lot of construction, obviously, in Minnesota, because we got Highway 100 and 169 is going to be shut down all year in that section of Minnetonka there, actually, for the whole entire summer. For 1 year, they're going to close that. But I think one of the best ways for the long term that we can also infuse money into roads and bridges and infrastructure and transit, if it meets the scoring tests and shows it's efficient, is to put money basically in from energy royalties and energy exploration here in the United States. And Tim Walz and I, and from Minnesota, he and I have talked about this many times. We introduced a bill in the past that would do this, the largest actually investment in transportation and other infrastructure for canals and waterways actually in the history of the country. And you don't end up in the fight with a gas tax, etc. But you do guarantee that those royalties for new energy exploration are going to be dedicated and tied to infrastructure, for instance. Okay, we're going to keep rolling here. Looks like next we got Roger in Bloomington. Roger, thanks for waiting.
Yes, Representative Paulsen, I've been getting emails. First of all, thank you for having this forum tonight. I've been getting emails about an upcoming changes in patent legislation, and I know we had some major changes a couple of years ago, and we haven't really waited to see what how that's going to affect innovation in the country. And I was wondering what you can tell me about the pending legislation and your position on it.
Yeah, okay. And this is an issue that has gotten attention recently, and we've had the issue like patent trolls, for instance, right, and this intellectual property have come more to the forefront. And it is important that we have a level playing field that protects innovators from any harmful actors. And at the same time, I guess we got to be careful not to include provisions that might harm innovation or those that are in that community who may be affected. So there has been some patent legislation that has moved through, I think, through the committee, but not through the House floor, because essentially there's a little bit of a disagreement between the larger companies and the smaller companies about who is protected in terms of when they invent their patents, and the tech companies have a different viewpoint than, say, the medical device manufacturers. And so there's a little battle going on there, if you will, sort of behind the scenes, and the different stakeholder groups arguing about what the appropriate solution is, because these patent trolls have been coming in and suing people, in coffee shops, et cetera, for using a fax machine or wireless internet, and then saying that they're violating a patent by making it available, and then they threaten to file a lawsuit. But the real goal is just to settle out of court, which is essentially just bringing in money for these attorneys and lawyers that are patent trolls hunting around for people that are abusing so-called patents, even though that's not the case. So we want to make sure that any patent changes are not going to upset sort of the innovation opportunity, the innovation card. So if you have any direct feedback, because it sounds like you have a little knowledge on this, and I've engaged with a few patent attorneys in Minnesota, I'd encourage you just to contact me or reach out or just give me a call at the office, and my staff kind of handles this issue, and I would love to get your feedback or insight on that, because that would actually be really, really helpful for me. And this is a big part of what I do, is actually being in listen and learn mode, because it's not like I've got all the answers to these more challenging problems, but by listening and learning from a lot of folks like yourself or others that you may know, it's actually able to, I guess, get a better understanding of how to move forward. All right, we're going to keep rolling. We got John from Minnetonka. John, thanks for waiting.
I've got thanks for taking my call.
Yeah.
I've got budget proposals from Paul and Ryan. I'm looking at this long list that adds up to total savings of $2.5 trillion over 10 years. I'm looking down this list, and is this the way this goes out? This must be the way it goes out to the Congress. But I mean, it mentions $2.5 trillion worth of stuff that I think most Americans have never heard of. We've got $250 million annually, for example, for the HOPE VI or the HOPE 6 program. I never heard of it. We're still paying $1.6 billion annually for Amtrak subsidies. We got 68 duplicating educational programs. Apparently legislation has been introduced to reduce that. But long list, a Woodrow Wilson Center study, $20 million of our money every year for that. I don't understand all this stuff.
Yeah. Well, listen, Johnny, I mean, you are two things. One, you're making the case for why there needs to be more transparency about line item by line item about what is being spent with your money, right? Taxpayer money on different programs. Now, the good news is, you know, earmarks are now prohibited. Those are not allowed based on the old system, for instance, that always took place. You mentioned the $2.5 trillion in savings. And, you know, this one of the biggest issues I have with federal spending is that programs never sunset. And I think programs should have to sunset. They should have to come back and re-justify and be reauthorized by proving that they've met certain benchmarks, by proving they've made progress. And that has not been the case with a lot of these programs. They get to go on, and they get funded at a basic level plus inflation. And again, we've made a lot of changes or cuts. You know, the budget you mentioned balances in 10 years. So after a 10-year period, guess what? The debt is going to start to be paid down, and we go in a different direction. You know, that's not the case with the president's budget. You know, for 8 years in a row, he has submitted a budget that never, ever balances, ever. I mean, it never balances. And, you know, at some point you just have to sort of understand that you have to do that. And even the president's Joint Chief of Staff, Mike Mullen, once said that the biggest threat to our national security, and this is a military general, he said, is our national debt. And again, it stands at $19 trillion now. So again, those line items add up, and I think we should sunset those programs. And I will just, I think any serious budget blueprint is also going to have to tackle mandatory spending, which is, again, that's one of the more serious drivers of our long-term debt as well. Okay, we got time for a few more questions. We're going to keep rolling. I think we got Wayne from Plymouth. Wayne, thanks for waiting.
Yes, I have a question on Social Security.
Okay.
If you took all the Social Security tax paid in, put it in a lockbox, you just use it for Social Security, would that solve the problem with Social Security?
Well, I don't think so, actually, Wayne. Just that, you know, the fact is they've been blending all that money. You know, so the so-called lockbox concept is not real, right? It's just not. And again, I would just say two things. One, we should be protecting and preserving Social Security for seniors. And we got like 10,000 people that are retiring every day, and so we need to make really careful changes. If you're going to make changes to any programs, you got to do it carefully, so you're strengthening the program for both today's seniors and tomorrow's seniors. And you've got to do it in a bipartisan way. There are fewer people paying in now. I think in 2016, payroll taxes, you know, that were being put in would cover only about 81% of scheduled benefits. And so, again, that's been the trend. It's getting worse. So by 2033, those payroll taxes will be covering about 77% of scheduled benefits. And that's because there are fewer workers paying in now for, you know, retirees that are in the system. And so that's just an issue and a reality that does need to be addressed. But the simple answer is no. If you put all that money in a lockbox, it's not going to be enough to make up for the cost of the program, because right now those payroll taxes are only covering about 81% of the benefits, and in, again, 17 years, it's going to cover 77%, and the trend continues to go in that direction overall. We got time for one more question. If we didn't get to your question, don't hang up, because you'll go into my voicemail right away. I get back, my staff get back to everybody within 24 hours. I roll right through, and we get back to everybody. I think we've got David on the line. David, if you're still there, thanks for waiting.
Yes, Congressman Paulsen, thank you very much for taking my call. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Just a question. I'm approaching retirement, and fortunately for me, my wife and I have saved for retirement, and we're actually quite looking forward to these years. Once or twice a year, I read really sobering statistics about the huge percentage of baby boomers that have saved virtually nothing for retirement. And I'm trying to figure out what this is going to result in terms of kind of personal financial crises for these impending seniors. Yeah. So my question is this a topic that's ever discussed at Congress? And if so, what actions are being discussed?
Yeah, it's a really good program. It doesn't get enough conversation, I'll be honest, David. It doesn't. The only time it has come up recently is because there's been a new rule that has been proposed by the Department of Labor called the fiduciary rule. And a lot of people in the investment community in particular have been very concerned about sort of the onerous and burdensome language around this rule, where it essentially would, once it categorizes everyone as a so-called fiduciary, they essentially are saying that a lot of people that offer services to middle-income folks, and especially people of more modest means that should be saving for retirement, will no longer offer that. They'll offer their services to wealthier individuals that want a financial plan, et cetera, but they're not going to be offering to folks of middle income or modest means. And that's a real problem, because we should be doing more to encourage savings across the board, and putting less strain on these social nets, safety nets, as you had mentioned. So that's the only time that this has actually come up for recent discussion recently. And that's really about it. And there's just not enough focus on it. And it's actually a challenge I've seen across at the congressional level, is that sometimes you don't get a lot of thoughtful, substantive issues. You can be frustrated even watching some of the campaigns discussion going on right now, that the major candidates don't talk more about substance. It's more about just superfluous issues. And hopefully that's going to change, because I think the country is facing significant issues both on the economic front as well as the foreign policy leadership front that need to be confronted and addressed. And I think we're hungering for that. We're starving for that. And that's, I think, the population is. So we are going to wrap up. If you are on the line, you've asked a question by dialing *3 on your phone, don't hang up. You're going to go right into a queue. We get back to everybody in the next 24 hours. And if you have any follow-up, don't hesitate to reach out to my office anytime. Make sure you're following me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. A lot more people are using social media that day, so we are as well. If you're coming to Washington, planning your trips and tours, contact me and let me know how we can help. We can help you with red tape and issues with Social Security or passports or Medicare. We handle casework and are often successful, even with mortgage issues, etc. And that's part of just what we do in serving you, because that's the office is there for your service, for everyone in the 3rd District in Minnesota. And also, finally, I just want to thank you for the privilege of representing you. And it is an honor, and sometimes a challenge, because I go back and forth every week, and you miss the family. But I enjoy the people of the 3rd District. I enjoy visiting every single classroom, every single business, and then taking what I learn and then putting it to practice to basically more effectively represent you and being a voice to get things done. And we've been able to do that on a handful of issues, on tax policy, on human trafficking, and hopefully on some new healthcare initiatives in that direction. So continue to reach out, stay in touch. I hope to see you at my next Congress on Your Corner telephone town hall or telephone town hall meeting as well, and have a great evening and a great week. Thank you.
The teleforum has ended.
Thank you again for participating in my telephone town hall meeting. I'm sorry I was unable to get to everyone's question, but please